The HOA president stood on my dock at 7 a.m. screaming about my illegal boat ruining our community lake, while literally trespassing on my private property to threaten me with a lawsuit over my own water. Karen Whitmore's stiletto heels dug into the cedar planks I'd personally stained last summer, waving a cease and desist letter like some kind of legal weapon. This rust bucket is gone by Friday, Sterling, or I'm calling my lawyer and the sheriff. $200 a day in fines, plus we're putting a lien on this shack you call a home. The diesel scent from my restored '87 Chris Craft mixed with her sickeningly sweet perfume as she jabbed her blood-red nail toward my pride and joy. What she didn't know? That community lake she kept screaming about? Every drop of it, all 47 acres, was mine. But here's the thing about bullies. They always tell you exactly how they plan to destroy themselves. So I just smiled, sipped my coffee, and let Karen dig the hole that would bury her HOA career forever. What would you do if someone tried to steal your own property right in front of you? Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what's your worst HOA horror story? Let me back up 18 months to when this whole nightmare started. I'm Marcus Sterling, 52, spent 25 years in Army logistics before I got smart and retired to the mountains. My uncle Theodore left me this little cabin on what I thought was just another pretty lake in Colorado. The old guy was always the family oddball, lived like a hermit, but somehow had money stashed everywhere. The cabin wasn't much to look at. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that belonged in 1970. But man, that view, sitting on the back porch with morning coffee, watching the mist rise off perfectly still water while loons called back and forth. That's what peace sounds like after decades of military chaos. The lake's shaped like a teardrop, 47 acres of pristine mountain water surrounded by 12 modest homes. Nothing fancy, just regular folks who wanted quiet retirement spots. At least that's what I thought until I met Karen Whitmore. Karen moved in 3 houses down about 6 months after me. White BMW, white teeth, white lies. Everything about her screamed, I don't belong here, but I'm taking over anyway. She's 48, sells real estate, and married to some city council wannabe named Derek. Within 2 weeks of unpacking, she was elected HOA president. Amazing how that works when you're the only one who actually wants the job. My first red flag should have been when she introduced herself. I was out on the dock, working on my boat engine, the Chris Craft I'd bought as a wreck and spent 3 years restoring. Every bolt, every piece of mahogany, every chrome fitting had been lovingly rebuilt. She clip-clopped down in those ridiculous heels, smiled her realtor smile and said, "Oh, you're the military man. Well, I hope you understand we maintain certain standards around here." Certain standards. Like that phrase doesn't drip with condescension. The boat became her obsession. Too big, she said. Too loud. Didn't match the aesthetic vision she had for our waterfront community. Never mind that half the other docks had boats just as large. Never mind that mine was probably the most beautiful vessel on the water. Karen had decided I was the problem, and Karen always got her way. The smell of her perfume, something expensive that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, lingered on the dock long after she left. But mixed with the honest scent of cedar shingles warming in morning sun and the creosote from old dock pilings, it felt like an invasion, like someone had sprayed artificial flowers in a real garden. That first violation notice arrived on a Tuesday. Crisp white paper, official HOA letterhead, and enough legal-sounding threats to intimidate anyone who didn't know better. Oversized recreational vessel violates community aesthetic standards per Covenant 14.7b. $200 daily until removed. Here's the thing about military training. It teaches you to gather intelligence before you react. So instead of getting angry, I got curious. Who was this woman who thought she could order around a retired Army officer on his own property? And more importantly, what didn't I know about Uncle Theodore's little gift that might change the game entirely? Because if there's one thing 25 years of logistics taught me, it's that the person with the best information usually wins. And something told me Karen hadn't done her homework nearly as well as she thought. Karen didn't waste time turning up the heat. 3 days after that first violation notice, she called an emergency HOA meeting. Of course, she scheduled it for 2 p.m. on a Wednesday when most working folks couldn't attend. Classic power play, stack the deck, control the narrative, win by default. I showed up anyway, carrying my little green deployment notebook and a thermos of coffee that smelled better than Karen's overpriced perfume already choking her pristine living room. Her house looked like a furniture showroom explosion, all white leather and glass tables designed to intimidate visitors into not touching anything. She'd gathered her usual suspects, 3 retirees who nodded at everything she said, plus Derek lurking in the corner like a nervous accountant counting someone else's money. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen began, clicking open her laptop with the theatrical precision of a prosecutor announcing murder charges, we have a situation that threatens the character of our entire community. A PowerPoint presentation, 20 slides, about my boat. I'm not kidding. She'd photographed my Chris Craft from bizarre angles, low shots that made it look like the Titanic, wide shots that somehow made a 30-foot boat appear to consume the entire lake. The woman had talent, I'll give her that. Evil talent, but talent nonetheless. Mr. Sterling's vessel, she pronounced vessel like it was a venereal disease, exceeds our size restrictions and creates unsafe navigation hazards. Furthermore, the engine noise disrupts our peaceful community atmosphere during early morning hours. I sat there listening to this Academy Award performance, documenting every accusation in my notebook. My old sergeant used to say, "Sterling, when someone's digging their own grave, don't grab the shovel, just hand them a bigger one." When she finished her dog and pony show, I raised my hand politely. "Ma'am, I appreciate the presentation, professional quality, but I have some questions." Her realtor's smile tightened like a guitar string about to snap. "Could you clarify these size restrictions? I've read our covenants twice, actually, and can't find specific boat length limits." I flipped through my copy, every relevant section marked with neat military precision. "Well," Karen's voice pitched higher, "it's clearly implied in the aesthetic standards clause." Implied. Interesting. I made a note, the pen scratching loud in the sudden quiet. "Second question. Derek's got 2 jet skis plus that cigarette boat. What's their combined length? Because from my dock they look roughly equivalent to my single vessel." The sound of Derek's gulp was audible from across the room. But here's where my 25 years of dealing with military bureaucrats paid dividends. I'd spent the morning at City Hall, and bureaucrats love helping veterans navigate red tape. Also, fascinating discovery at the permit office today. Derek's dock extension, no application on file. That's actually a municipal code violation requiring immediate remediation. Funny how these things work out. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a bass gasping in the boat well. "How dare you investigate? Just following your lead on community standards, ma'am, due diligence and equal enforcement." The crunch of gravel interrupted her sputtering Betty Jamie's ancient Buick announcing reinforcements. Betty, 73, taught high school English for 4 decades and could dismantle teenagers' arguments with surgical precision. Karen never stood a chance. "Sorry I'm late, dear," Betty said, bustling in with homemade snickerdoodles that made Karen's store-bought cookies look like cardboard circles. "I was admiring Marcus's boat. Reminds me of the classics from when people built things to last instead of impress." Then Betty leaned close, whispering just loud enough for the entire room. "Theodore had boxes of old papers in that basement. Legal documents, surveys, all sorts of interesting history. Might be worth exploring sometime. I've played poker with colonels and contractors. I know a tell when I see one." The flash of panic across Karen's face wasn't subtle. It was neon sign obvious. Years later, I realized that moment taught me something crucial about fighting bullies who abuse official power. They're only strong when you don't know the rules better than they do. Document everything, research deeper than they expect, and watch them crumble when their bluffs get called. The meeting ended with Karen promising to research the matter further, and me promising to review all available documentation. But we both knew this was just round 1 of a fight she'd started without knowing her opponent's qualifications. Walking home under darkening skies, I could smell rain approaching over the mountains, that electric ozone scent that warns of storms brewing. Something told me Karen's PowerPoint presentation was just the first lightning flash before the real thunder started. Karen didn't appreciate having her bluff called. Within a week, she'd escalated from neighborhood theater to full-scale warfare, and her first move was bringing in outside muscle. The city inspector showed up on a gray Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, and the weary expression of a man who'd seen too many petty neighbor disputes. His name was Rodriguez, and he had the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Got a complaint about dock safety violations," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Anonymous tip." Anonymous, my ass. Karen's BMW was parked 3 houses down with a perfect view of my property, and I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear like some kind of suburban spy. Rodriguez spent 2 hours measuring, photographing, and testing every bolt on my dock. The morning sun heated the cedar planks under our feet, releasing that honest wood scent that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this place. When he finished, he shook his head. "Everything's up to code. Better than code, actually. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." He paused, glancing toward Karen's car. "Between you and me, Mr. Sterling, I get a lot of these calls. Usually means someone's got a personal problem they're trying to make official. After he left, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a petition, "Concerned residents request immediate action regarding unsafe watercraft," with exactly 7 signatures. Karen's flowing script topped the list, followed by Derek's nervous scrawl and 5 others I recognized from her little coffee klatch. But the interesting part wasn't who signed it, it was the wording. Karen had described me as a transient resident with temporary military benefits who brought an unstable element to our established community. The woman was practically broadcasting her prejudices in legalese. My phone started ringing that afternoon. First Betty, then Phil Kozlov from 2 doors down, then Mrs. Patterson from across the lake. All of them had received visits from Karen asking pointed questions about my background and whether they felt safe with my boat in the water. "She's telling people you're some kind of PTSD case," Betty reported, her teacher voice sharp with indignation. "Says military people can be unpredictable and your boat is probably compensation for psychological issues." That evening I sat on my back porch with a beer and my laptop, diving deep into public records. If Karen wanted to play investigator, 2 could play that game. And what I found was fascinating. Derek Whitmore, city council wannabe, had been using HOA maintenance funds to pay his brother's landscaping company. $18,000 over 2 years, all for emergency community improvements that somehow never got completed. The invoices were public record. Derek had filed them for tax purposes. Better yet, Karen's real estate license had 2 official complaints filed against it, one for misrepresenting property conditions and another for aggressive sales tactics. Neither resulted in suspension, but they painted a picture of someone who played fast and loose with rules when it suited her. Phil knocked on my door around 8, carrying 2 more beers and a grim expression. Phil's a contractor, built half the docks on our lake, and he's got the kind of practical wisdom that comes from 40 years of dealing with people's home improvement fantasies. "Karen came by my shop today," he said, settling into Uncle Theodore's old rocking chair. "Wanted me to inspect your dock, find something wrong. When I told her it was solid as Gibraltar, she offered to pay me for a more thorough examination." The evening air carried the sound of water lapping against the shore, mixed with the distant hum of a fishing boat motor. Normal, peaceful lake sounds that Karen was trying to poison with her manufactured drama. "There's something else," Phil continued. "She's been asking around about your uncle. Wants to know if he ever mentioned property boundaries, water rights, stuff like that. Got real interested when I mentioned Theodore was always secretive about his legal affairs." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If Karen wanted to dig into my background, I'd dig into Theodore's legacy. The basement Betty mentioned was calling to me, and something told me Uncle Theodore's secretive legal affairs might hold surprises that would make Karen's PowerPoint presentations look like kindergarten finger painting. I'd learned in the Army that the best defense is often a superior understanding of the battlefield. Time to explore the terrain Karen didn't even know existed. The next morning brought the scent of rain on pine needles, and the first real clue that this fight was about to shift in ways Karen couldn't possibly imagine. Karen's third escalation came with lawyer letterhead and the kind of legal threats that make most people fold faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The envelope was thick, expensive, and delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than our quiet lake community. "Notice of intent to pursue legal action," screamed the heading in bold Times New Roman. Karen's attorney, some downtown shark named Bradley Finch, had crafted 3 pages of legalese demanding my boat's immediate removal, plus damages for diminished property values and community disruption. They wanted $5,000 and a signed agreement that I'd never dock anything larger than a canoe without HOA approval. I was reading this masterpiece on my back porch when my phone rang. Emma, my daughter, calling from her senior year at Colorado State. "Dad, what the hell is going on up there?" Her voice carried that mix of concern and exasperation I remembered from her teenage years. Derek Whitmore's wife friended me on Facebook, then spent 20 minutes messaging me about how worried she is about your adjustment issues. That crossed a line. Going after me was one thing, but dragging my kid into Karen's psychological warfare? The woman had just declared total war without realizing she was poking a sleeping bear with military training and nothing but time on his hands. "Emma, honey, how'd you like to help your old man with a research project?" 3 hours later, Emma arrived with her laptop, a bag of Thai food, and the kind of determined expression she'd inherited from her mother. We spread out on the kitchen table like a command center, surrounded by takeout containers that filled the cabin with the scent of basil and chilies. "Okay, Dad, I've been digging into Karen's social media, public records, even her real estate reviews. This woman's got a pattern. Emma pulled up a spreadsheet that would have made my old logistics sergeant proud. She's done this before. 3 different neighborhoods, always targeting single men or anyone she thinks doesn't fit in. But the real gold mine was in Theodore's basement, and it took us until midnight to find it. Boxes and boxes of documents, some dating back to the 1960s, all meticulously organized in Theodore's careful handwriting. Property surveys, tax records, correspondence with lawyers, water rights applications. The man had kept everything. The breakthrough came when Emma found a manila folder marked Lake Acquisition 1962-1978 in Theodore's precise script. Inside were deeds, contracts, and payment records that told an incredible story. "Dad, look at this!" Emma's voice was tight with excitement. "Uncle Theodore didn't just buy lakefront property. He bought the lake itself." The documents were crystal clear once you knew how to read them. When the original developer went bankrupt in 1963, Theodore had quietly purchased not just his cabin lot, but every parcel that included water rights. Deed by deed, year by year, he'd assembled ownership of the entire lakebed, water column, and all navigation rights. The legal language was archaic but unambiguous. All waters, improvements thereon, and exclusive navigation privileges in perpetuity. Theodore owned every drop of water Karen kept calling community property. "This is insane," Emma breathed, cross-referencing the deeds with current property maps. Every other house around the lake? They owned to the high water mark, but their deeds specifically exclude water rights. Those were already owned by Theodore. My phone buzzed with a text from Phil. "Karen's been asking contractors for estimates on major dock work. Word is she's planning something big for spring." I showed Emma the message, and she grinned with the kind of mischievous delight that reminded me exactly why she'd been such a handful as a teenager. "Dad, she has no idea what she's walking into, does she?" The next morning, I called Jennifer Patel, a property lawyer Betty had recommended. Smart woman, sharp as a tack, and she'd handled plenty of HOA disputes. When I explained what we'd found, the silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mr. Sterling," she finally said, "I need to see these documents immediately. If what you're telling me is accurate, we're not talking about an HOA violation case anymore. We're talking about 30 years of trespassing on private property." That afternoon, while Jennifer reviewed Theodore's papers, I sat on my dock listening to the gentle lap of water against the pilings. My water, my lake, my 47 acres of pristine mountain paradise that Karen had spent months threatening to regulate. The irony was delicious, but I'd learned something important from my years managing military supply chains. Information is only powerful when you know exactly how and when to use it. Karen was still escalating, still making threats, still digging herself deeper into a hole she didn't even know existed. Time to let her keep digging while I prepared the perfect moment to show her just how deep that hole really was. Jennifer Patel called me at 7:30 the next morning, and I could hear the excitement crackling through the phone like static electricity before a thunderstorm. "Marcus, you need to sit down for this." Her voice had that barely contained energy lawyers get when they stumble onto a case that'll make their career. "I've spent all night with a property law specialist cross-referencing every document in Theodore's collection with current county records." I poured myself coffee and settled into Uncle Theodore's old kitchen chair, the one that creaked in exactly the same spot it had creaked when I was 12 years old visiting for summer vacations. "Your uncle wasn't just eccentric," Jennifer continued. "He was a strategic genius. Between 1962 and 1978, he systematically acquired every single water rights parcel associated with this lake, not just his own property, all of them." The morning sun was streaming through my kitchen window, casting shadows that danced across Theodore's meticulously organized legal files spread across my table. 40 years of careful planning laid out in manila folders and carbon copy contracts. "Here's what happened," Jennifer explained. "When Pinewood Development went bankrupt in 1963, they had to liquidate assets fast. Most buyers focused on the valuable lakefront lots, but Theodore saw something different. He bought the water rights parcels considered worthless at the time for pennies on the dollar. I could picture him doing it too. Theodore had always been the family oddball, the guy who collected stamps and built elaborate model trains in his garage. Turns out he was also quietly assembling one of the most valuable private water holdings in Colorado. Every subsequent property sale around the lake specifically excluded water rights because they'd already been sold to Theodore. The buyers got beautiful lakefront homes, but the lake itself, that remained Theodore's private property. The implications hit me like a freight train loaded with irony. Karen had spent months threatening to control my use of community waters when every drop of that water legally belonged to me. She'd been standing on my dock screaming about my boat and my lake while threatening to sue me for using my own property. Jennifer, what exactly does this mean in practical terms? It means, she said with obvious satisfaction, that every dock, every boat slip, every swimming area, every fishing spot, they all exist on your private property by your grace and tolerance. The HOA has no authority over lake activities because the HOA doesn't own any part of the lake. Through my window, I could see Karen's white BMW pulling into her driveway. She climbed out wearing her power suit, probably headed to another realtor meeting, where she'd describe herself as a community leader protecting property values. If only she knew how spectacularly wrong she was about whose property she was trying to protect. There's more, Jennifer continued. Your uncle was apparently a quiet conservationist. He filed preliminary paperwork for a conservation easement but never completed it. That suggests he wanted to protect the lake's natural state while maintaining legal control. The pieces were falling into place like a puzzle I'd been working on without seeing the picture. Theodore's simple lifestyle, his reputation as a hermit, his mysterious financial resources, he'd been quietly stewarding a natural treasure while letting the community enjoy it informally. So legally, I let the sentence hang. Legally, you could ban every boat, close every dock, and prohibit any water access by anyone other than yourself. Today, this afternoon, right now. Jennifer paused for effect. Or you could use this knowledge more strategically. The coffee had gone cold in my mug, but I didn't care. 30 years of community assumptions were about to collide with 40 years of quiet legal planning. Karen's cease and desist letters suddenly looked like parking tickets written by someone who didn't own the parking lot. Jennifer, I need time to think about this. Take all the time you want, Marcus. But remember, knowledge is only power when you know how to use it. And something tells me Karen's not done escalating yet. She was right, of course. Karen had declared war on someone she thought was just another retiree she could bully into submission. She had no idea she'd picked a fight with the one person who legally owned everything she was trying to control. Time to see how far she'd push before I showed her just how spectacularly she'd miscalculated. The next 48 hours felt like preparing for a military operation, except instead of logistics and supply chains, I was coordinating lawyers, environmental specialists, and a surprisingly cunning network of fed-up neighbors who'd been waiting years for someone to take Karen down a peg. Jennifer arrived Wednesday morning with reinforcements. David Kim, an environmental lawyer who specialized in water rights, and Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, my old JAG officer buddy who'd retired to Denver and owed me a favor from our Kosovo days. Sarah took one look at Theodore's documents and whistled low. Sterling, your uncle just handed you the legal equivalent of a nuclear weapon. Question is, do you want to level the city or just remove one annoying dictator? We spread everything across my dining room table: surveys, deeds, environmental reports, and a growing stack of documentation about Karen's increasingly desperate behavior. The cabin smelled like strong coffee, and the kind of focused intensity that comes when smart people tackle a complex problem. Here's what we know, Jennifer began, pointing to a color-coded map David had prepared. Marcus owns 100% of the lake. Bed, water column, navigation rights, everything. Every dock exists by his permission. Every boat launches with his tolerance. Every property owner around this lake has been trespassing on his water for 30 years. David leaned forward, his environmental expertise adding another dimension. But here's the beautiful part. Theodore's conservation research shows this lake is pristine, no pollution, no invasive species, perfect ecosystem balance. Marcus could create a conservation easement that protects the environment while maintaining community access. Sarah, ever the strategist, was already thinking 3 moves ahead. The question isn't what you can do legally, it's what you should do practically. Karen's escalating because she thinks she's dealing with a normal neighbor dispute. Time to show her she's been playing checkers while you inherited a chess set. Emma had driven up from college with her laptop and that determined expression she gets when someone's being unfair to people she cares about. She'd been monitoring Karen's social media campaign, documenting every lie and exaggeration. Dad, look at this. She turned her screen toward us. Karen's been posting in regional HOA Facebook groups, painting you as some kind of unstable veteran who's terrorizing a peaceful community. She's got 3 other HOA presidents offering to testify about the dangers of letting military people live in residential areas. The pure ugliness of it hit me like a slap. This wasn't about boat sizes or community standards. This was about Karen's prejudices against anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of acceptable neighbors. The woman had turned her personal biases into a crusade, and she was recruiting allies who shared her twisted perspective. "That actually helps us," Sarah observed, with the cold calculation of someone who'd prosecuted war crimes. "Discrimination based on military status violates federal fair housing laws. She's not just wrong about the property rights, she's creating civil rights violations." Phil knocked on the door around noon, carrying sandwiches from the deli and a grim update from his contractor network. "Karen's husband got permits for a major dock expansion, talking about a boat lift that'll handle a 40-foot yacht. Guess the size restrictions don't apply to people named Whitmore." Betty arrived an hour later with homemade apple pie and 40 years of teaching experience that had taught her how to spot bullies and the people who enable them. She'd been quietly organizing the neighborhood resistance, and her intelligence network would have impressed the CIA. "5 families are ready to testify about Karen's harassment," she reported. "The Johnsons, the Patricks, old Mr. Henderson, the new couple in the blue house, and surprisingly, the Williamses' Karen thought they were loyal supporters." We spent the afternoon developing what Sarah called our strategic revelation timeline. Phase 1. Let Karen continue escalating while we documented everything. Phase 2. Reveal the property ownership at maximum impact. Phase 3. Implement a fair lake use agreement that protected everyone except Karen from future abuse. "The key," Jennifer explained, "is timing. We want Karen fully committed to her legal threats before we show her how empty they are. Let her hire expensive lawyers, file official complaints, maybe even start actual litigation. The deeper she digs this hole, the more spectacular her fall will be." David was already drafting a conservation easement that would permanently protect the lake while creating a community access agreement. This way, Marcus maintains ownership but guarantees reasonable use rights for all current residents. Future buyers will know exactly what they're getting: lakefront property with defined water access privileges. As the sun set over my lake, and the reminder that it was literally my lake still gave me a little thrill, I looked around the table at this unlikely war council: a property lawyer, an environmental specialist, a retired military prosecutor, my brilliant daughter, and a network of neighbors who'd finally found someone willing to stand up to a bully. We had superior intelligence, better legal positioning, and the kind of righteous anger that comes from watching someone abuse authority they never actually possessed. Karen had no idea what was about to hit her, but she was about to learn that sometimes the quiet neighbor you underestimate is the one who owns everything you're trying to control. Karen's next move came with the subtlety of a hand grenade in a library. She filed an actual lawsuit, not just threats anymore, but honest-to-God legal papers demanding my boat's removal, $5,000 in damages, and a permanent injunction preventing me from disrupting community harmony with oversized watercraft. Bradley Finch, her downtown shark, had crafted a masterpiece of legal fiction. According to his filing, my boat created navigation hazards in public waters, caused noise pollution during community quiet hours, and represented visual blight inconsistent with established neighborhood character. The man had a gift for making a beautifully restored Chris Craft sound like a floating garbage scow, but the real kicker was buried in page 4. They were claiming adverse possession rights to the lake based on 30 years of continuous community use. Karen wasn't just trying to regulate my boat, she was attempting to legally steal my lake through a technicality that would have made a Wild West claim jumper proud. Emma found the filing online within hours of its submission. "Dad, she's gone full nuclear. This isn't neighbor harassment anymore. This is attempted theft of property worth probably $2 million. The morning after the lawsuit arrived, I woke up to find sugar in my boat's fuel tank. Not enough to destroy the engine, but enough to cause expensive damage if I'd actually started it up. The sweet smell mixed with gasoline created a nauseating combination that reminded me of sabotage tactics I'd seen in Bosnia. Phil's security camera had caught a shadowy figure near my dock around 2 a.m., but the image was too dark for positive identification. Still, the body language looked familiar. Derek's nervous shuffle was pretty distinctive, even in grainy night vision footage. "This is escalating beyond property disputes," Sarah observed when I called her with the news. "Vandalism changes everything. File a police report, get everything documented, and consider this a gift. They're creating criminal evidence while we're preparing to destroy their civil case." Detective Morrison from the county sheriff's office spent an hour photographing the fuel tank, collecting samples, and taking my statement. He had the weary professionalism of someone who'd seen too many neighbor disputes turn ugly, but something about the sugar trick seemed to pique his interest. "Funny thing about fuel system sabotage," he said, screwing the fuel cap back on. Most people don't realize sugar actually dissolves in gasoline, creates a syrup that'll gum up fuel lines and injectors. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. That afternoon, Karen escalated from vandalism to character assassination. She'd convinced Channel 9 News to run a story about HOA fighting military intimidation, complete with dramatic footage of my boat shot from angles that made it look like a destroyer threatening a peaceful pond. The reporter, some ambitious kid named Blake Morrison, had clearly bought Karen's narrative wholesale. Residents of this quiet lakefront community say they're living in fear of retaliation from a former soldier who refuses to follow basic community guidelines, he announced in that breathless tone local news uses for stories about missing cats. They interviewed Karen on her pristine dock, wearing a white sundress that practically glowed against the dark water behind her. "We're just trying to maintain the peaceful character that attracted us all to this special place," she said with the kind of wounded innocence that would have won her an Emmy if acting paid better than real estate. But Karen made one crucial mistake in her media strategy. She kept referring to our community lake and shared waters in every interview. Each time she used those phrases, she was creating evidence that she believed the lake was public property. Evidence that would look pretty stupid when Jennifer revealed the actual ownership situation. Emma had been monitoring social media reaction to the news story, and the comment section was brutal. Half the viewers were buying Karen's victim narrative, but the other half had apparently dealt with similar HOA tyrants and were firmly in my camp. "Look at this one, Dad," Emma said, scrolling through Facebook responses. "I hope this vet tells that HOA witch exactly where she can shove her boat regulations. These people have no idea what real problems look like." This guy has 3,000 likes. Phil stopped by that evening with 2 pieces of intelligence that made my day considerably more interesting. First, his contractor network had discovered that Derek's dock expansion permits were based on falsified property boundaries. He'd somehow convinced the city that his lot extended 10 feet further into the lake than it actually did. Second, and more importantly, Karen had been shopping for lakefront property in Durango. Big, expensive spreads with private lake access and no HOA restrictions. The woman was already planning her exit strategy while simultaneously trying to destroy mine. "She's panicking," Phil observed, settling into Theodore's old porch rocker with a beer. "All this legal theater, the media campaign, the vandalism, it's the behavior of someone who knows they're losing control and doesn't understand why." That night, I sat on my dock listening to the gentle lap of water against the pilings and watching lights flicker on in houses around the shoreline. Tomorrow, Karen would probably escalate again. More lawsuits, more media interviews, maybe more sabotage attempts. She was spiraling toward complete desperation, and desperate people make catastrophic mistakes. From a purely strategic standpoint, I almost felt sorry for her. Karen had declared war without bothering to scout the battlefield, and she was about to discover that sometimes the quiet neighbor you underestimate is the one holding all the cards you thought you were playing for. Karen's final desperate gambit came wrapped in official HOA letterhead and the kind of legal language that screams, "Hail Mary pass," from someone who's already lost the game. She was calling an emergency board meeting with a hired stenographer, her downtown lawyer, and enough theatrical staging to make Broadway jealous. The invitation arrived by certified mail on a Friday, demanding my attendance at a formal disciplinary hearing the following Tuesday. According to the notice, I was being charged with willful violation of community covenants, harassment of board members, and my personal favorite, conduct unbecoming a community resident. Emma laughed so hard when she read that last one that she nearly choked on her coffee. Conduct unbecoming? What is this, a court-martial? Did she seriously just try to use military disciplinary language against an actual veteran? But the real comedy gold was buried in the meeting agenda. Karen had invited City Councilman Patrick Hayes, County Commissioner Linda Rodriguez, and that ambitious reporter Blake Morrison to witness her accountability demonstration. She was planning to publicly humiliate me in front of local officials and media, apparently unaware that she was about to step on the biggest landmine in Colorado legal history. The bribery attempt came Sunday night, delivered by Karen's most loyal supporter, a nervous real estate agent named Cheryl who'd clearly drawn the short straw for this particular mission. She knocked on my door at 8 p.m., clutching an envelope and wearing the expression of someone being forced to pet a rattlesnake. "Marcus," she stammered, "Karen wanted me to give you this. It's a settlement offer. She's willing to drop everything if you just agree to dock your boat somewhere else. There's even money involved." Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $5,000 and a pre-written agreement that would have banned me from keeping any watercraft over 20 feet on community waters. The document also included a non-disclosure clause preventing me from discussing the settlement negotiations with other residents. I looked at Cheryl, who was sweating despite the cool mountain evening air. Tell Karen I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I can't accept. She said you might say that. Cheryl's voice dropped to a whisper. She also said to tell you that fighting City Hall never ends well for anyone. That was interesting. Karen was threatening to use her husband's connections to make my life difficult through official channels. Too bad she didn't realize that threatening a property owner with government retaliation creates a whole different category of legal problems. Monday brought news that Karen had convinced the state environmental agency to investigate potential lake contamination from boat fuel systems. Some anonymous tipster, I wonder who, had reported suspicious odors and possible petroleum discharge from my dock area. The inspector who showed up was a competent woman named Dr. Sarah Jamie, who took her job seriously and didn't appreciate having her time wasted on obvious vendettas. She spent 2 hours testing water samples, photographing my boat's fuel systems, and documenting the pristine condition of everything she examined. "Mr. Sterling," she said as she packed up her testing equipment, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and this is one of the cleanest private docks I've ever inspected. Whoever filed this complaint was either grossly misinformed or deliberately malicious." Her report would become part of the official record, another piece of evidence showing Karen's pattern of filing false complaints to harass someone she couldn't control through legitimate means. That evening, Phil brought disturbing news from his contractor network. Derek had been quietly soliciting bids for major dock modifications that would require removing part of my property's shoreline buffer. The plans showed a boat lift capable of handling a 40-foot yacht, plus a floating dock system that extended 50 feet into the lake. "The permits are fraudulent," Phil explained, spreading the blueprints across my kitchen table. "They claim the work is happening on Whitmore property, but look at these coordinates. Half of this construction would be on your land, and about 30 feet of it extends over areas where Derek has no legal rights whatsoever." Betty arrived with Apple turnovers and intelligence from her network of retired teachers who'd turned Neighborhood Watch into a precision operation. "Karen's been making phone calls to every contractor in 3 counties, trying to find someone willing to testify that your boat is unsafe. When that didn't work, she started offering cash payments for expert opinions about navigation hazards." The pattern was clear. Karen had moved from harassment to fraud to bribery to environmental false reporting. She was systematically violating multiple state and federal laws while attempting to steal property worth millions of dollars, all because she couldn't accept that someone had told her no. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear, with that crystalline mountain air that makes everything seem sharper and more focused. I could hear Karen's voice drifting across the water as she directed the setup for her accountability demonstration, positioning cameras and arranging chairs like a prosecutor preparing for a death penalty case. What she didn't know was that Jennifer, Sarah, and David were already in place, armed with 40 years of legal documentation and a property ownership revelation that would turn her theatrical performance into the most spectacular public humiliation in HOA history. The sound of cars arriving at the community center mixed with the gentle lap of water against my dock, on my lake, where Karen had been trespassing every time she came to threaten me about violating regulations she had no authority to enforce. Time to show her exactly how badly she'd miscalculated. The community center buzzed with the kind of electric tension that comes right before someone's world explodes in spectacular fashion. Karen had transformed the modest meeting room into her personal courtroom, complete with a stenographer's table, professional lighting for the news camera, and enough folding chairs to accommodate what looked like half the county. She'd positioned herself behind the HOA board table like a judge, flanked by her expensive lawyer Bradley Finch and Derek, who kept nervously adjusting his tie. City Councilman Hayes sat in the front row with Commissioner Rodriguez, both wearing the patient expressions of politicians fulfilling campaign promises they'd rather forget. The crowd was bigger than anyone expected. Word had spread through Phil's contractor network, Betty's teacher mafia, and Emma's social media campaign. 43 people packed into a room designed for 20, creating a wall of witnesses that would make Karen's humiliation absolutely unforgettable. I walked in at exactly 7 o'clock with Jennifer, Sarah, and David flanking me like the legal equivalent of special forces. Jennifer carried a leather briefcase that contained 40 years of Theodore's meticulously organized documentation, while Sarah had a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Karen's smile could have powered the building. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for finally joining us for this long-overdue accountability session." Her voice carried that syrupy condescension she used when she thought she held all the cards. Blake Morrison positioned his camera for the perfect angle while Karen launched into her prepared statement about community standards and shared responsibilities. She'd clearly rehearsed this performance, gesturing dramatically toward enlarged photos of my boat that made it look like the USS Missouri threatening a fishing pond. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen announced, her realtor training evident in every practiced gesture, "we're here to address a situation that threatens the very character of our peaceful lakefront community. Mr. Sterling has repeatedly violated our size restrictions, ignored our aesthetic guidelines, and when confronted about these reasonable concerns, responded with harassment and intimidation." Bradley Finch stood to present their legal case, complete with a PowerPoint that belonged in a courtroom rather than a community center. Property values, navigation hazards, noise pollution complaints. He'd built an impressive case based on the fundamental assumption that Karen had any legal authority over lake activities. "The defendant's vessel," Finch intoned with courtroom gravitas, "represents a clear violation of established community standards governing shared water resources. We demand immediate removal, damages for community disruption, and a permanent injunction preventing similar violations." The audience shifted restlessly. This felt more like a witch trial than a neighborhood dispute, and several people were already looking uncomfortable with Karen's prosecutorial theater. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, the way I'd learned to command attention in military briefings, and nodded respectfully toward the city officials and news camera. "Thank you, Councilman Hayes, Commissioner Rodriguez, members of the community. I appreciate everyone taking time from their evening for this important discussion." Jennifer opened her briefcase with theatrical precision that matched Karen's performance. "However, before we discuss boat regulations, there's something everyone should know about this lake." Karen's smile flickered slightly, but she was too committed to her script to stop now. "Ms. Whitmore has spent considerable time discussing community standards for shared water resources," I continued, accepting a thick folder from Jennifer. "But there's a fundamental problem with her entire argument." The room went dead quiet except for Blake Morrison's camera capturing every moment. "This lake isn't a shared resource." I unfolded David's color-coded survey map, the one that showed property boundaries in devastating detail. "I own it. Every drop, every square inch of water, lake bed, and navigation rights." The silence was so complete you could hear the building's ventilation system. Karen's face went from confident pink to suspicious pale to horrified white in about 3 seconds. "What you're looking at," Jennifer announced, standing to address the crowd like a professor delivering a lecture, "is 40 years of legal documentation showing that Marcus Sterling inherited complete ownership of this 47-acre lake from his uncle, Theodore Sterling." She held up the original 1962 deed, Theodore's methodical property acquisitions, and water rights certificates that predated every house around the shoreline. "Every dock, every boat slip, every swimming area exists on Mr. Sterling's private property by his tolerance and permission." Karen found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "That's impossible. This is community water. We've been using it for 30 years. "By the grace and informal permission of Theodore Sterling," Sarah interrupted with prosecutorial precision. "Permission that was never legally granted and can be revoked at any time." Bradley Finch looked like a man who'd just realized he'd been arguing a malpractice case. His expensive lawsuit wasn't just wrong, it was spectacularly, embarrassingly, career-damagingly wrong. He was suing a lake owner for using his own lake. Blake Morrison's camera captured Karen's expression as the implications sank in. Every regulation she'd tried to enforce, every threat she'd made, every violation notice she'd written, all of it was based on authority she never possessed over property she didn't own. "So when you demanded that I remove my boat from community waters," I said with the kind of calm satisfaction that comes from holding 4 aces, "you were actually trespassing on my dock to threaten me about using my own lake." Commissioner Rodriguez leaned forward, her political instincts recognizing a disaster when she saw one. "Mr. Sterling, what exactly does this mean for the community?" "It means," I replied, looking directly at Karen's shocked face, "that I could legally prohibit every boat, close every dock, and ban all water access by anyone other than myself. Today, right now, this very minute." The crowd's collective intake of breath sounded like wind rushing through pine trees. "But I won't," I continued, watching relief flood through the room. "Because unlike some people, I believe in being a good neighbor." Karen's humiliation was complete, captured in high definition by Blake Morrison's camera and witnessed by half the county. She'd declared war on someone who owned everything she was trying to control, using authority she never possessed to regulate property that belonged to her target. The woman who'd spent months calling me a troublemaker had just been revealed as the person trespassing on private property to harassment the actual owner. Game, set, match. The community center emptied with the buzz of people who'd just witnessed something they'd talk about for years. Karen sat frozen at the board table, staring at Jennifer's legal documents like someone deciphering her own death certificate, while Bradley Finch packed his briefcase with movements that screamed, career-ending malpractice lawsuit. Derek approached with the nervous shuffle of a man whose world had just imploded. Marcus, Karen always said, if we'd known... He couldn't finish the sentence, probably calculating legal fees in his head. Derek, we're neighbors, I said, offering my hand. This doesn't have to destroy anyone who's willing to be reasonable. Karen resigned via email within 24 hours and had a for sale sign planted faster than Phil could say good riddance. Betty won the emergency HOA election with a platform of treating people like human beings instead of property violations, and her first act was apologizing to me on behalf of the community. But the real magic happened in what came next. The Theodore Sterling Memorial Conservation Fund launched that spring, and watching Emma present the first scholarships to environmental law students brought tears to my eyes. Uncle Theodore's quiet genius was finally getting the recognition it deserved, funding the next generation of people who'd protect places like our lake. Phil organized monthly cleanup days that turned into community celebrations. Families picnicking on the shore, kids learning to fish from the docks, couples watching sunsets from the water, exactly what Theodore had envisioned when he spent 40 years quietly protecting this little piece of paradise. The annual Veterans Fishing Tournament became legendary, drawing participants from 5 states and raising thousands for veteran support programs. The scent of grilled burgers mixed with pine air every August, while old soldiers shared stories and taught young ones how to cast properly. Jennifer's pro bono HOA clinic helped dozens of homeowners fight similar battles across Colorado. Her motto, borrowed from my Army days, became gospel for property owners. Know your rights before someone else pretends they own them. She kept Theodore's story as Exhibit A in every presentation about doing your legal homework. Blake Morrison won a regional journalism award for his follow-up series on community healing, and the lake became a case study in environmental law schools. Students visited every semester to understand how private ownership could protect public goods when guided by wisdom instead of greed. 6 months later, I was watching sunset paint the water gold when Emma called with news that made Uncle Theodore's legacy complete. The state had designated our lake as a model conservation site, permanently protecting it from development while maintaining community access. Dad, she said, you know what the best part is? Karen tried to join the HOA board in her new community, but someone there had read the news stories. They voted her down unanimously. The loons were calling across water that would never be threatened by petty tyrants again, their voices mixing with laughter from children swimming near Betty's dock. The evening air carried the scent of barbecue smoke and the contentment of a community that had learned to appreciate what they had instead of trying to control what they couldn't. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about building something so beautiful that the people who tried to destroy it become irrelevant footnotes in a much better story. Every evening, I sit on my dock with coffee that tastes like victory, watching families enjoy water that's been protected for 60 years and will be cherished for 60 more. Uncle Theodore's quiet wisdom had created something Karen's petty authoritarianism never could, a real community based on respect instead of fear. That's what happens when bullies pick fights with people who know the actual rules instead of the made-up ones. Share your HOA horror stories in the comments. We read every single one, and your nightmare might be featured in our next episode. Subscribe to HOA Stories for weekly tales of neighborhood tyrants getting exactly what they deserve, and hit that notification bell because next week we're covering the HOA that tried to steal a disabled veteran service dog. Trust me, you won't believe how spectacularly that backfired.
You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens get a reality check. If this episode gave you secondhand rage or satisfaction, hit that like, leave your take in the comments, and subscribe so you're the first in line for more weekly HOA chaos.